I was 27 when my parents first told me that my dreams were a joke. My name's Evan, and I grew up in a small town where people measured success by how many hours you worked and how early you could afford your first mortgage. My dad, Robert, was the kind of man who believed that a steady paycheck was the only mark of maturity. My mom, Sandra, spent her days comparing me to my cousins like it was an Olympic sport. My older brother, Brian, was their golden child, an engineer with a real job and a house in the suburbs by 25. Meanwhile, I was the disappointment who played with computers all day. I'd been freelancing as a software developer since I was 19. It started small, fixing websites for local shops, setting up online stores, that sort of thing. But over time, it grew into something real. I built apps, managed clients from overseas, and even started a small team. It wasn't glamorous, but I made enough to support myself comfortably. My parents never saw it that way. To them, it wasn't a job if it didn't come with a suit, a manager, and a parking space. I still remember the first time they mocked me openly. It was Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. Brian had just announced that he got promoted to project manager at his firm. My mom's eyes lit up like she'd just been handed a grandchild. "See, Evan," she said, passing me the mashed potatoes. "This is what happens when you choose a real career. Stability, benefits, and respect. You could learn a thing or two." I forced a smile, pretending the words didn't sting. "I'm doing fine, Mom. I have clients. I'm saving up." Dad cut me off, his tone dry. "Clients aren't bosses, son. They can disappear any second. When Brian's company needs him, they keep him. When your clients don't need you, what do? Beg for work." The table laughed, Brian included. I felt like I'd shrunk 2 sizes smaller right there, sitting between my parents' framed expectations and my brother's smirk. I didn't argue, though, not because I agreed, but because I'd learned something about my parents over the years. You couldn't reason with them when their pride was on the line. After dinner, I helped clean up while Brian and Dad sat on the couch watching football. Mom kept talking about how it's time I got serious about my future. "You're almost 30, she said, drawing a plate. "You can't keep doing this internet thing forever. It's not sustainable. Why don't you apply where your father works? They have great benefits." My dad worked at a manufacturing company called Westline Industrial. Mid-size, been around forever, kind of the town's pride and joy. The idea of clocking in there every morning made my stomach twist. "Mom," I said quietly, "I'm not meant for that. I'm building something. It might not look like much yet, but I believe in it." She gave me that look, the same one she used when I said I didn't believe in Santa. "You and your ideas. You'll learn one day that belief doesn't pay bills." For the next few months, I avoided talking about work around them. Whenever we met, I just nodded and let Brian carry the conversation. It wasn't worth it. But then came the real blow, when I told them I was thinking of buying my first home. It was early spring, and I'd saved up a decent chunk from a few long-term contracts. I'd found a small but nice townhouse on the edge of the city, nothing extravagant, but something I could finally call mine. I told them over Sunday dinner, trying to sound casual. "I've been looking at houses," I said, "and I think I found one that's perfect. I might put down an offer soon." Mom nearly dropped her fork. "With what money?" "My savings," I said, smiling. "I've been putting money aside for years." Dad chuckled, shaking his head like I'd just announced I was buying a spaceship. "Come on, Evan. Be serious. You're not making that kind of money. Unless you're lying about how much this computer gig pays." I laughed nervously. "It's freelance, Dad. It adds up. I've been smart about it." Brian chimed in from across the table, smirking. "You sure it's not one of those get-rich-quick things? Maybe he's been selling NFTs or whatever those are." The whole table laughed again, except me. I tried to explain how my business worked, how I had contracts, recurring clients, and projects that brought steady income. But they didn't want to hear it. To them, success only came from doing what everyone else did. "You should ask us for help if you're serious," Mom said finally. "We can co-sign for you, maybe lend you something toward the down payment, but only if you get a proper job first. You know, something stable, something real." That word, real, it followed me home that night. It echoed in my head as I scrolled through the house listings again. It wasn't about the money to them. It was about control. They didn't want me to succeed on my own terms. They wanted to be able to say, "See, he needed us." I didn't take their offer. I bought the house myself, without their help. It wasn't easy. I had to liquidate some investments and work insane hours for a few months. But when I got the keys, standing in that empty living room, I felt something I hadn't in years: pride. I invited them over after I moved in. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud too. They weren't. "This neighborhood isn't great," Mom said the moment she stepped inside. "You should have waited. If you'd let us help, you could have gotten something nicer." Dad just looked around with a smirk. "Looks small, but I guess it's good for a start." Brian laughed. "You know what this reminds me of? Those YouTube setups people have when they still live in their mom's basement." It was supposed to be a joke, but it wasn't funny. I brushed it off again, the same way I always did, pretending their words didn't matter. But inside, something started to shift. The thing about being mocked your whole life is that eventually, it either breaks you or builds something inside you that doesn't go away. That night, after they left, I stayed up working. Not just to prove them wrong, though that was part of it, but because I realized something. I didn't want their approval anymore. I wanted success so undeniable that even they couldn't twist it into something to ridicule. Months passed. Business grew faster than I expected. A startup I'd helped design software for got acquired, and they offered me a full-time position as their lead developer. I negotiated partial ownership instead. It was the best decision I ever made. By the next year, my income tripled. I upgraded my car, renovated my home, and hired 2 full-time employees. I didn't tell my parents. I let them think I was still barely getting by with my computer thing. Then, one morning, I got a call that changed everything. It was my dad. His voice was quieter than usual, strained. "Evan," he said, "Westline's downsizing. They're letting a lot of us go." I didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Yeah," he muttered. "They've been struggling. New management, bad decisions, you know how it is." I didn't know, because I'd been looking into Westline Industrial for months. Not out of spite, at least not at first, but because a client of mine had been analyzing potential acquisitions in the area, and Westline was on the list. At the time, I hadn't realized the irony. But now, hearing my dad on the other end of the phone, suddenly unsure and vulnerable, it hit differently. He went on about how unfair it was, how loyal he'd been for 20 years. No severance, no respect, just a meeting and a handshake. For the first time in my life, I heard defeat in his voice. And I didn't know whether to feel sorry for him or something else entirely, because part of me already knew what was coming next. And that's when everything began to change. When Dad lost his job, I thought, maybe foolishly, that it might humble him. For the first time, the man who'd spent decades lecturing me about real work was suddenly unemployed. But humility wasn't in his vocabulary. Within a week, the story in our family group chat had changed from "Westline fired me" to "the economy is falling apart." My mom was in full-blown defense mode, talking about how loyal employees were being betrayed by greedy companies. I offered help, not money, just to take a look at his resume and maybe help him find something remote. I knew several tech companies looking for logistics coordinators or manufacturing consultants. But he shot it down instantly. "I don't want some kid sitting at a laptop teaching me how to find a job. I've been working longer than you've been alive." That was the tone of every conversation that followed. Pride, denial, and a sharp undertone of bitterness. He'd always defined himself by his work, by the long hours, the steady paycheck, the feeling of being needed. Now that it was gone, it wasn't just his job that vanished. It was his sense of control. Mom didn't help. She made his failure my responsibility in subtle, infuriating ways. "Your father's just been under stress lately," she said one evening over the phone. "Maybe if you visited more, or took him out somewhere, it would cheer him up." "Mom," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose, "I've been buried in projects. I'll see you guys soon, but..." "Evan, this is when family shows up, not when it's convenient." It was always like that. When Brian got a promotion, celebration dinner. When Dad lost his job, I was supposed to drop everything and play therapist. A month later, they came over uninvited. I was in the middle of a Zoom meeting when the doorbell rang. My dad stood on the porch, wearing his old Westline jacket, holding a plastic grocery bag like it was his badge of honor. Mom followed right behind, already talking before I could even greet them. "We were in the neighborhood, and I told your father you could use some help organizing this place. It still feels temporary." The temporary jab again. My home never felt good enough for them. They sat down in the living room like they owned it. Dad turned on the TV without asking, flipping through channels until he found a sports recap. Mom started tidying non-existent messes, straightening cushions, wiping down counters that were already spotless. "You really need a woman's touch in here," she muttered. "I'm fine, Mom. Are you? You still eating those takeout meals?" "I cook," I said, even though I didn't really. They stayed for hours. Every attempt I made to ease them out just got brushed off. When they finally left, the house felt smaller, like their judgment had clung to the air. The next week, Mom called again. "Brian's thinking about moving closer to the city," she said. "He and Lauren found a 3-bedroom condo. Maybe you could help him figure out his financing. You're good with money, right?" I froze. "What do you mean, help him?" "Well, he's got great credit, but you know, houses are expensive these days. Maybe you could loan him a little? You don't have kids, and you've been doing well. It would be nice to help your brother out." I almost laughed out loud. "Mom, are you seriously asking me to give Brian money for a house?" "It's not giving," she corrected, like that changed anything. "It's family helping family." I wanted to ask her where that family helping family sentiment was when I was scraping together every cent for my down payment. But I didn't. I just said, "No, I can't do that." She sighed heavily. "You've changed, Evan. You used to be so generous." That comment stayed with me for days. Generous. I had paid my own way through college, built a business from scratch, bought a home with no help. And somehow, I was the selfish one. Brian called that same evening. "Hey, man," he said, sounding way too casual. "Mom said you might help me out with a little down payment boost. Don't worry, I'll pay you back." "She had no right to tell you that," I said sharply. "Oh, come on. It's not a big deal. You've been making good money, right? You probably spend more on your computer setup than what I'm asking." "Brian," I said, holding back a rising irritation, "I'm not loaning you money." He was silent for a beat, then laughed. "Wow, guess Mom was right. You really did get full of yourself." That was the first time I hung up on him. After that, I distanced myself. Fewer visits, fewer calls. I focused on my company. Things were accelerating, new contracts, investors interested in expanding. I started hiring locally, building something sustainable. But every time I spoke to my parents, they made it sound like I was still one bad day away from ruin. Dad, meanwhile, couldn't find a new job. Westline's collapse had hit hard. Several companies in the same sector were downsizing too. He spent months looking, which mostly meant sitting at home watching TV and complaining about kids ruining industries. By late summer, things got worse. Mom started hinting that I should help them out a bit. It began small, maybe cover a few bills while your father gets back on his feet, but the tone shifted quickly. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by their place with groceries, thinking it might lighten the mood. Dad barely looked at me. Mom, on the other hand, went straight for it. "Your father and I have been talking," she said. "We think it's time you stepped up a little." "Stepped up?" I asked. "Yes. Family supports family, Evan. You've been doing so well, and your father's retirement is still years away. It's not fair that he's struggling while you're out there buying gadgets and cars." I set the grocery bag down on the counter and took a slow breath. "Mom, I've offered to help him look for work. I've offered to pay for courses." "We don't want handouts," Dad interrupted, finally looking up. "We just think you should contribute something for a while. Rent, groceries, whatever. It's the right thing to do." "Rent," I repeated, incredulous. "I don't live here." "You grew up here," he said flatly. "We helped you when you needed it. When did you ever help me financially?" He looked away. Mom shot me a warning glare, the kind that meant, "Don't disrespect your father." That was the moment I realized they weren't just asking. They were expecting it. Like it was my obligation to carry them now that their carefully built world had cracked. I didn't argue. I just left the groceries, said I had work to do, and drove home. I didn't speak to them for almost 2 weeks after that. During that time, I threw myself into work. We were negotiating a big partnership deal, something that could double our revenue. And the company we were working with? A small manufacturing firm that had just bought out several struggling plants in the region. One of them used to be part of Westline Industrial. I remember the first time I saw the name pop up in the paperwork. It gave me a strange chill. The plant had been closed for months, its equipment sitting idle, its land undervalued. The acquisition was a steal, and I had a front row seat to it. Around that same time, my parents started calling again. Not to apologize, that would have been too easy, but to update me on Brian's success. He and Lauren had closed on their condo. "We're so proud of him," Mom said, her voice warm in a way it never was when talking about me. He's really doing it right. Planning for the future, building stability. Did you help him financially? I asked, already knowing the answer. Well, we co-signed, she admitted. But it's different with Brian. He's got a family to think about. You'll understand one day. That line, you'll understand one day, made my stomach tighten. It was her way of saying, you don't matter yet. By winter, things reached a breaking point. I got a call from Mom, frantic this time. Evan, your father's upset. He tried calling the union about his severance, and they said the plant's under new ownership. They won't return his calls. He says he's been cheated. Mom, I said slowly. The plant was bought by a private firm. The union probably doesn't handle that anymore. Well, you're the business expert, she snapped. Can't you do something? Maybe talk to them. I almost told her the truth, that I knew exactly who owned it, and that I'd soon have a much bigger role in that ownership myself. But I didn't. Not yet. Something in me wanted to see where this was going first. And where it went was straight downhill. Dad started blaming everyone for his situation, his old boss, the new management, the government, even me. You're part of this new generation ruining everything, he told me during one particularly heated call. Companies don't care about loyalty anymore because kids like you made everything about profit and convenience. I bit my tongue, every muscle in my jaw tight. Dad, I didn't make the economy, I said. You're benefiting from it, he shouted. Sitting there behind a screen, making money off the backs of people who actually build things. I hung up, not out of anger, out of exhaustion. After that, the call stopped. For a while. Then came Christmas. I wasn't planning to go, but Mom called again, her voice trembling just enough to get me there. Your father's been quiet, she said. He's not himself. Just come for dinner, please. I showed up with a bottle of wine and a carefully neutral smile. Brian was already there, cracking jokes about his new car. Mom was setting the table, humming, pretending nothing was wrong. Dad sat in his armchair, staring at the TV. Hey, Dad, I said softly. He looked up, eyes tired. You doing all right, son? It sounded almost genuine. For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, things had softened. Then, halfway through dinner, Brian said it. Hey, Dad told me something crazy, he laughed. You know his old company? The new owners are apparently your client or something. Is that true? The table went silent. My fork froze midair. Where'd you hear that? Dad's union buddies were talking about it. They said your name came up in some business filing. Mom frowned, confused. What's that supposed to mean? I felt everyone's eyes on me. And that's when the tension finally snapped. The silence after Brian's comment was suffocating. The clinking of forks stopped. The TV hummed softly in the background, and I could feel my parents' eyes boring into me. My mom was the first to speak, her voice sharp but deceptively calm. What does he mean, Evan? What's this about your name coming up with your father's company? I set my fork down slowly, trying to think. It's nothing shady. I do consulting work for a client who's been acquiring old plants in the region. One of them happened to be a Westline property. That's all. Dad's expression darkened. So you knew? I knew they were buying Westline's assets, I said carefully, but I didn't know exactly which divisions or who was affected until recently. Mom's voice rose an octave. And you didn't think to tell us? Your father has been losing sleep over that place, and you're just, what? Helping the people who took his job. It's business, I said, already knowing how hollow that would sound to them. Business. Dad spat, pushing his chair back. You call this business? You sat there, listening to me talk about how they ruined my career while you were part of it. I opened my mouth to explain that I wasn't part of it, that the acquisition had saved hundreds of local jobs, but the words died on my tongue. He wasn't looking for an explanation. He was looking for someone to blame. Mom stood up too. Unbelievable. Your father gave 20 years to that company. 20 years. And you, his son, are profiting off its collapse. The word profiting hung in the air like poison. Brian leaned back in his chair, smirking like he was watching a movie. Man, this is wild. You couldn't make this stuff up. That was the moment something inside me snapped. You think I caused this? I said, my voice shaking. Do you even understand how this works? I didn't fire Dad. I didn't close the plant. You just did what was convenient. Dad interrupted, his voice low but dangerous. You always do. The rest of dinner disintegrated into chaos. Mom was crying, Dad was shouting, and Brian was pretending to mediate, but throwing in little digs every chance he got. When I finally left, The air outside felt heavy. Snow had started to fall, covering the driveway in a soft white layer. I stood by my car for a minute, just breathing, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I got a text from Mom that simply said, "Your father doesn't want to see you for a while. I think it's best you give him space." Space. That was her polite way of saying you're not welcome here. I tried to focus on work, but the situation gnawed at me. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be Dad, ready to talk, or at least yell again. But weeks passed, and the silence grew colder. Then one evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was from an old contact at the new company, the one that had acquired Westline's assets. "Hey, Evan," he said cautiously. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. There's been some noise from a former employee. Claims about insider deals, favoritism, that kind of thing. Says he has proof." My stomach dropped. "Who?" "Robert Hayes. Ring a bell." I froze. My father's name. For a moment, I couldn't even respond. He's my dad." There was a long pause. "I thought so. Look, man, I don't know what's going on between you two, but he's been emailing people. HR, investors, even journalists. Says his son sold him out and made money off the deal." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're kidding." "I wish I was. It's not causing damage yet, but if he keeps it up, it could turn ugly. Just thought you should know." When I hung up, I sat in my office chair for a long time, staring at nothing. My own father, accusing me of betraying him publicly. I called Mom immediately. She answered on the third ring, sounding tired. "Evan, please don't start." "Don't start?" "Mom, do you know what Dad's been doing?" She sighed. "He's upset. He feels wronged. You have to understand, that company was his life. Losing it was hard enough. Then finding out his own son had a hand in. I didn't have a hand in it. He knows that. Maybe he doesn't anymore," she said quietly. I pressed my palm against my forehead. "He's contacting journalists, Mom. This isn't just venting. He's spreading lies. Do you have any idea what that could do to me? To my business?" She hesitated. "He's hurting, Evan. Don't make it about you." I almost laughed. "He's trying to ruin me, and you think I'm making it about me? Watch your tone," she snapped. "Your father has been through enough." That was the moment I realized they would never take my side. Not once, not ever. The next few days were chaos. I had to call my company's PR team, prepare statements, and warn investors that someone was making false claims. It never went public, thankfully, but the trust I'd built with some of my partners took a hit. When the dust settled, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't text, didn't call. I just showed up. Mom opened the door, eyes wide. "Evan, what are you?" "Where's Dad?" "In the living room," but I didn't wait. I walked past her, straight into the room. Dad was sitting on the couch, half watching the news. He looked up, and his face hardened instantly. "Why?" I asked. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking. "Why would you do that?" He turned off the TV and leaned back, arms crossed. "Do what?" "Don't play dumb. You've been contacting people, spreading lies about me. About the company." He didn't deny it. I told them the truth. That my son made a fortune off the same people who threw me out like garbage. "That's not true," I said, my voice rising. "I didn't even know you'd been laid off when the deal went through. You're twisting things because you can't accept what happened." He stood up slowly. "You think you're better than me now? You sit behind that fancy desk of yours, talking about innovation and progress, while real men like me get replaced by machines and spreadsheets. This isn't about that." I snapped. "You lost your job because Westline was mismanaged for years. I had nothing to do with that." He stepped closer, eyes burning. "You could have warned me. You could have done something. But you didn't, because deep down, you liked it. You liked seeing me knocked down a peg." I felt something inside me twist painfully. "You actually believe that?" He didn't answer. Mom appeared in the doorway, her voice trembling. "Both of you, please. Stop this." But it was too late. I stared at him. This man who'd once been larger than life, who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd drilled discipline and loyalty into my head, and I barely recognized him. "Dad," I said quietly, "you're destroying our family over something that isn't even true." He just shook his head. "No, Evan. You destroyed it the moment you chose money over blood." I left without another word. For weeks after that, we didn't speak. Not on holidays, not on birthdays. My mom texted occasionally, small things like, "Hope you're doing okay," or "Dad's blood pressure has been high lately." I'd reply politely, but keep it short. Then one day, I got a notification a local business journal article had gone live. The headline made my stomach lurch. Local entrepreneur linked to controversial takeover of Westline Industrial. The piece wasn't outright defamatory, but it quoted anonymous sources, clearly echoing my father's accusations. The damage was immediate. A few clients paused contracts. My inbox filled with questions from journalists. I felt sick. That night, I sat in my car outside my parents' house for nearly an hour, staring at the dark windows. I thought about knocking, screaming, demanding he fix what he'd broken. But then I remembered something. The look in his eyes that day. The cold certainty. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He thought he was getting justice. That was the night something changed in me. The hurt, the guilt, the constant need for their approval. It all began to rot into something else. Something colder. I realized I couldn't fix them. I couldn't make them see the truth. But I could make sure they'd never have the power to hurt me again. And as fate would have it, an opportunity to do exactly that was already in motion, one I hadn't even planned. It came quietly, disguised as a routine business meeting, when one of my partners mentioned a new acquisition proposal. A proposal that involved buying the parent company that now owned all of Westline's remaining assets. And with it, every shred of power my father had ever clung to. Rock bottom doesn't always feel like a crash. Sometimes, it's quiet, like the world just forgets you exist, and all the noise that used to fill your days fades into a long, cold silence. That's what it felt like after that article came out. The piece spread faster than I expected. Local business forums reposted it. A few industry newsletters picked it up, and within days, the story was everywhere in my small corner of the professional world. Local tech founder profits from layoffs. Westline insider turned entrepreneur. The headlines twisted the truth until I barely recognized myself in them. Clients didn't exactly drop me overnight, but they started to distance themselves. Emails became more formal, conversations shorter. A few politely postponed projects. I didn't blame them. Nobody wanted to get caught up in potential PR fallout. The damage was subtle but deep, the kind that bleeds your credibility drop by drop. I tried to fight it at first. I drafted statements, talked to a lawyer, even contacted the journalist who'd written the piece. She said the article was factual and that they had multiple corroborating sources. I didn't need to guess who one of them was. For the first time in years, I couldn't focus on work. I'd sit at my desk, staring at my monitor, cursor blinking over unfinished code. Every idea that once excited me now felt hollow. I'd built my business on trust, reputation, and resilience. And suddenly, all three were slipping through my fingers. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake replaying every conversation with my father, wondering if there was a version of events that could have gone differently. If I'd said more, explained better, swallowed my pride one more time, would he still have done it? Or was this always how it was going to end? About 2 weeks after the article dropped, I drove to their house again. I didn't even plan it. I just found myself on that familiar street, headlights cutting through the early evening fog. The porch light was on, same old creaky steps leading to the door I'd walked through 1,000 times. Mom opened it, wearing her housecoat, her hair tied up. Her expression shifted instantly, from surprise, to worry, to something colder. "Evan, you shouldn't be here." "I just want to talk," I said quietly. "Your father doesn't want to see you," she said, keeping her voice low, like we were discussing a family secret in church. "Mom, he's ruining my life." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You did that yourself." The words hit harder than I expected. "You actually believe that?" "I believe your father gave everything to that company. And I believe you took advantage of the situation instead of standing by him." "I didn't take advantage of anyone. I tried to help. I offered him work, advice. He didn't want it." She shook her head. "You always think you're helping when really you're just proving you're better." That was the moment I realized she wasn't just defending him. She resented me too. "Does Brian think that too?" I asked, even though I already knew. Her silence was answer enough. When I finally left, I didn't even make it to the car before the first tear hit. I hated crying. I hadn't done it in years. But something about hearing those words, from the person who was supposed to love you no matter what, broke something in me that I didn't know could still break. The next few months were a blur of damage control. My company survived, barely, but I was bleeding clients. I sold my car, downsized some of my expenses, and laid off one of my 2 full-time employees. I couldn't even tell them the full story. I just said, "We're restructuring." The humiliation was quiet, private, and suffocating. I stopped going out, stopped answering friends' texts. The only messages I got from my family were short updates about Brian's life. Brian got promoted again. Brian and Lauren are expecting. Never once did they ask how I was holding up. I kept expecting some flicker of guilt from them, some acknowledgement, anything, but nothing came. There was one morning that still plays in my head like a broken record. I woke up late, checked my phone, and saw a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of my dad at a local diner with the caption, "Still can't believe what you did to your old man." No name, no context, just that. I sat there staring at it, feeling a strange mix of anger and shame. Even strangers thought they knew the story now. That's when I stopped trying to explain myself. Something shifted inside me. Not like a movie moment where the protagonist suddenly finds their purpose again. More like a slow, heavy realization that no one was coming to save me. I was on my own, just like I'd always been. So I got to work. Quietly, I started rebuilding under the radar. I reached out to old clients personally, not with PR statements or press kits, but real, human conversations. I told them I understood if they wanted to distance themselves, but that my work spoke for itself. Some didn't respond. Some did. A few even came back, slowly. I rebranded my business, renamed it, changed the website, and started fresh. I stopped attaching my face to the brand. Let the results speak, not the headlines. In the meantime, I kept tabs on Westline's new management. The acquisition chain had grown complicated. The parent company, Arden Holdings, had been scooping up smaller manufacturing facilities across the region. They were bleeding cash, trying to modernize too fast. I noticed the cracks before anyone else did. And that's when a small, dangerous thought crept into my head. Maybe there was a way to turn all this pain into something useful. Not revenge, not yet. Just something constructive. But before I could act on it, things somehow got worse. In April, I got a call from my mom out of the blue. I hadn't heard from her in months. Her voice was trembling. "Evan, your father's in the hospital." My heart dropped. "What happened?" "Chest pains. They're running tests." I was already halfway out the door before she finished the sentence. When I got there, she was sitting in the waiting area, eyes red, hands gripping a paper cup of coffee. She looked older than I remembered. "He's stable," she said when she saw me. "They're keeping him overnight." I nodded, my throat tight. When I finally saw him, he looked smaller. The man who'd once seemed carved from stone now looked fragile, almost unfamiliar. Machines beeped softly beside him. He turned his head when I entered. "Didn't expect you to come," he said hoarsely. I stood by the bed, not sure what to say. "You're my dad," I managed. He looked away. Still, that hurt more than I wanted to admit. "Yeah, still." He didn't respond. We sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, he said, "You know, they offered me a consultant job last month. Some guys from the old plant. Said they'd pay under the table." "That's good," I said cautiously. I turned it down. Didn't feel right, taking scraps. He paused, his voice lowering. "You were right about one thing. That company was already rotting before they fired me." It wasn't an apology, not even close. But it was the first time he'd admitted I was right about anything. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between us. But the words wouldn't come. A nurse came in, interrupting the moment. She smiled at me, then turned to him. "You've got a good son here, Mr. Hayes. He's been waiting all day to see you." He just nodded, eyes still on the ceiling. That night, as I drove home from the hospital, I realized something strange. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes after fighting the same battle for too long. When I got home, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. No emails, no business plan, just a blank page. I started typing ideas, half-formed thoughts, possible moves. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about reclaiming control. If they thought I'd peaked, they were wrong. If they thought I'd fade quietly into nothing, they didn't know me at all. But I also knew I couldn't keep doing things the same way. My old life, chasing validation, seeking approval, was gone. What came next had to be different. The first step was distance. Real distance. I stopped answering calls from my mom. I unfollowed Brian and Lauren on social media. I blocked the people who'd spread the story. For the first time in my life, I stopped explaining myself. Instead, I worked. 12-hour days. Weekends. Late nights. Slowly, my company found its footing again. Leaner, quieter, more efficient. And behind the scenes, I kept my eye on Ardent Holdings. The cracks were turning into fissures. Financial reports showed losses, supply chain delays, internal conflicts. And then, one day, a rumor started circulating. Ardent was preparing to sell several of its assets, including Westline. That same week, I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't from my father, but from his attorney. A formal notice. He was suing me, not for defamation, not for slander, for emotional damages tied to my alleged role in his job loss. It wasn't about money. It was a statement, a final attempt to break me. When I finished reading the letter, I sat back in my chair and exhaled. No tears this time. No shouting. Just clarity. If this was the game he wanted to play, I was finally ready to stop defending myself and start fighting back. Winning didn't feel like revenge at first. It felt like survival. The lawsuit my father filed should have ruined me, or at least, that's what he hoped. But the court dismissed it within a month. The claims were vague, baseless, and riddled with emotional language. My lawyer called it a tantrum in legal format. Still, the damage was done. The humiliation of seeing my own last name listed next to his on a court docket burned worse than any public article. But that embarrassment did something I didn't expect. It hardened me. After years of being the quiet son, the misunderstood dreamer, the family's emotional punching bag, I finally stopped asking for fairness. I started thinking like someone who had nothing left to lose. And that was dangerous for them. My company, rebuilt, renamed, and restructured, was finally taking off again. Slowly, quietly, it started to thrive under my new direction. We'd pivoted into automation software. Ironically, the same kind of tech that companies like Westline had once dismissed. The irony didn't escape me. I was now helping manufacturers modernize their systems, training AI models to streamline operations, and saving companies millions. I worked 18-hour days, barely sleeping. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. Every client I gained, every investor I convinced, every deal I closed, it all added weight to the scale that had once been tipped against me. Then one morning, as I was reviewing contracts, my business partner Mia walked in, holding a printout. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Ardent Holdings is in trouble." I took the paper from her and scanned the headlines. Ardent faces financial strain after series of failed acquisitions. My heart skipped. I'd been waiting for this without even realizing it. The company that now owned what was left of Westline was falling apart, bleeding money, drowning in debt, and looking for a lifeline. Their leadership had changed 3 times in a year. Employees were leaving. Investors were panicking. "Guess who's looking to sell?" Mia said with a grin. "Westline," I murmured. She nodded. And not just Westline, their parent branch, too. They're restructuring, trying to cut their losses. We could buy in cheap. I looked at her, trying to mask the storm of emotion brewing inside me. "You're serious?" "Completely. I already checked. They're offering shares at a fraction of last year's price." For a long time, I just stared at the report, my thoughts spiraling. Buying into the company that had fired my dad. The same company that had sparked years of pain, humiliation, and betrayal. It was poetic. Too poetic. But I didn't want to do it for symbolism. I wanted to do it because it was smart business. So I said, "Let's make a call." It took months. Negotiations, meetings, investor pitches. I stayed calm, professional, never letting anyone see how personal it was. Mia knew. Of course. She'd been with me long enough to read between the lines. But she never said a word about it. She just worked alongside me, tireless and precise, as if she wanted to see this through as much as I did. By the time the deal went through, I owned 62% of the newly restructured division. Westline Industrial was mine. When the paperwork was finalized, I didn't celebrate. No champagne, no toast. I just sat alone in my office, staring at the digital signature on the screen. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was closure, a quiet exhale after years of tension. But that peace didn't last long. 2 weeks later, I got an unexpected call from my mother. "Your father heard a rumor," she said cautiously. "Something about you buying his old company." I didn't say anything. "Evan, tell me it's not true." "It's true." The silence that followed felt like a lifetime. Then she whispered, "Why would you do that?" "Because it was a good investment," I said flatly. "This isn't about business," she snapped. "This is about hurting your father." I closed my eyes, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "No, Mom. He already did that himself." I'm just building something from the pieces he left behind. She didn't call again for months after that. In the meantime, life started changing faster than I could process. My company's valuation doubled. Industry conferences started inviting me to speak. A few investors called me a visionary for seeing value where others saw failure. I wasn't sure if I deserved that label, but I didn't correct them. Money wasn't the intoxicating part, it was the freedom. For the first time, I wasn't answering to anyone. No boss, no parents, no expectations. Just me and the empire I'd quietly built while everyone was busy doubting me. Still, the shadow of my family lingered. I'd see my mom at the grocery store sometimes, pretending not to notice me. Once, she almost said hello, but then Brian appeared beside her, and she turned away. Speaking of Brian, he was thriving, or at least, that's what the family gossip said. New promotion, new baby, new house. He'd stepped comfortably into the role of the good son. But he didn't realize how fragile that illusion was. One day, out of nowhere, I got a text from him. "Brian, heard you're making big moves. Congrats." I stared at it for a while before replying. "Me, thanks." "Brian, Dad told me what you did. Bold move. You really bought the company that fired him?" "Me, business is business." "Brian, still, that's cold, man." I didn't respond. There wasn't a point. But I could sense something shifting. Whispers traveled fast in small towns, and now the whispers had turned into stories. Stories about the kid who made it big, the tech guy who bought Westline. Some painted me as ruthless, some as brilliant. Either way, people were talking, and that meant power. I leaned into it. I hired better staff, expanded operations, and launched a new division focused on sustainable manufacturing tech. The government grants rolled in. Partnerships followed. There were nights when I'd sit in my office overlooking the factory floor, the same floor where my father had once spent decades of his life, and feel a strange mix of pride and sadness. The machines hummed with precision, the air smelled of metal and oil, and I thought about the man who'd once told me I'd never understand real work. Now I was signing paychecks for over 200 employees. Still, I kept my ownership quiet. Publicly, the holding company was listed under a neutral name. I didn't want my father, or anyone else, knowing too soon. Not until I decided it was time. And time had a way of revealing itself at the perfect moment. One day, Mia walked into my office with a folder and that familiar spark in her eyes. "We've got an offer," she said. "A big one." I raised an eyebrow. "From who?" "Rothman Group. They want to buy the division outright. 8 figures, cash." I whistled softly. "That's tempting." "It is," she agreed. "But I get the feeling you're not done with this place yet." She was right. Selling it now would be smart. Profitable. Clean. But something in me wasn't ready to let go. "Not yet. Not yet," I said finally. "There's one thing I need to do first." She didn't ask what. She just nodded, like she already knew. Because in truth, I didn't want to sell it until I'd done what my father thought I never could. Until I'd proven, beyond question, that the son he mocked had built something far greater than the legacy he'd worshipped. And ironically, that moment came from him. A month later, my assistant walked into my office looking uneasy. "There's a man here to see you," she said. "He says his name is Robert Hayes." For a few seconds, I couldn't move. "Tell him to wait," I said finally, my voice calm despite the storm rising inside me. Through the glass window of my office, I could see him in the lobby. Older, thinner, wearing a faded jacket and that same proud, weary expression. My father, the man who'd mocked me, disowned me, and tried to destroy me, standing in the lobby of the company I now owned. He didn't know. Not yet. And in that moment, as I straightened my tie and walked toward the door, I realized I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the son begging for approval. I was the man he'd taught me to fear, and I was about to show him exactly what real power looked like. He looked smaller than I remembered. It had been almost 2 years since we'd last spoken face to face, and time had carved itself into him like a sculptor working with blunt tools. The once broad shoulders that used to fill a doorway now slouched forward. His hair, once jet black and combed with precision, had gone gray, wild at the edges. His hands, though still strong, trembled slightly as he held his worn baseball cap. He stood at the reception desk, talking softly with the front clerk, unaware that every square foot of this building now belonged to me. The same building that used to carry Westline's rusted signage, where he'd worked overtime shifts and bragged about real work, while I sat in my room typing code into a cheap laptop. Now, the plaques on the walls carried a new logo. My logo. I motioned to my assistant, Nora, to let him through. She glanced at me, hesitant, like she was trying to read if this was personal or professional. Are you sure? Yeah, I said quietly. Let him in. He turned when the glass doors opened. His eyes locked on mine, and for a brief second, I saw something flicker in them. Hesitation, pride, maybe even shame. It was gone just as fast. Evan, he said, stepping in. Didn't expect to see you here. I smiled faintly. I could say the same. He looked around, trying to take it all in. The modern lighting, the polished steel accents, the hum of quiet productivity that filled the hall. This place looks different, he muttered. Cleaner. Bigger. It's been renovated, I said. A lot's changed since Westline. He nodded slowly, running a hand along the wall like he was tracing the past. I gave 20 years to this place, he said softly. Never thought I'd walk in here again. There was no anger in his voice this time, just exhaustion. I gestured toward my office. Let's talk inside. He followed me, limping slightly, the soles of his boots leaving faint marks on the spotless tile. I could smell the faint scent of machine oil still clinging to him, like the ghosts of his old life had followed him inside. When we sat down, he took a deep breath and folded his cap in his hands. I didn't come here to fight, he said. I came because I heard something, and I needed to hear it from you. What did you hear? That you bought it. He looked up, meeting my eyes. That you bought the company that took everything from me. I leaned back in my chair, silent for a moment. It's true. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. Why? There it was, the question that had been hanging between us for years. Not just why I bought it, but why I'd chosen this path at all. Because I could, I said simply. Because I saw something worth saving, and no one else did. He stared at me, his face unreadable. You always had an answer for everything, he muttered. You think this makes you better than me? Owning the place that used to feed our family. I shook my head. It's not about being better. It's about doing what you never believed I could. He scoffed, though it came out weaker than before. You think this is a victory? No, I said quietly. It's survival. We sat there in silence for a while, the tension between us thick but fragile. Then he surprised me. They let me go without severance, he said, voice cracking slightly. 20 years, Evan. I trained half the guys who replaced me. I thought if I stuck it out, I'd retire here. But they didn't care. None of them did. He looked around my office again, and I could see it hitting him. The bitter realization that someone else, his son, now sat in the chair that had belonged to his old boss. I wanted to feel triumphant. I wanted to see justice in his eyes. But instead, I just felt tired. What do you want, Dad? I asked softly. He hesitated. A chance, he said finally. Just one. To work again. I can't sit at home anymore. I'm losing my mind. The air in the room went still. You're asking me for a job? I said, trying not to sound shocked. He met my gaze, unflinching. You're in charge now, right? You can make it happen. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just watched him. The man who had mocked every dream I'd ever had, now sitting across from me asking for help. I could have ended it right there. I could have told him no, that I wasn't hiring, that it was poetic justice to watch him finally understand what it felt like to beg for something you'd earned 100 times over. But I didn't. Not yet. Let me think about it, I said quietly. I'll get back to you. He nodded slowly, stood up, and left without another word. When the door closed behind him, I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window, my reflection faint against the glass. My father had just walked into my office, into my world, and unknowingly handed me the key to his pride. For the first time in years, the balance of power had shifted completely. But if I was going to do this, I needed to be careful. Revenge executed in anger looks sloppy. I wanted precision. Control. That night, I met with Mia over dinner. The restaurant was quiet, dimly lit, the kind of place where people talked about mergers and deals between sips of wine. I told her what had happened. She listened silently, her expression unreadable until I finished. Then she leaned back, folded her arms, and said, You're not thinking of hiring him, are you? I haven't decided, I said. But it could be useful. Useful how? If he comes here, he'll finally see how much the world's changed. How much I've changed. He'll have to live with it every day. She studied me for a moment. That's not revenge, Evan. That's exposure therapy, for both of you. I smirked faintly. Maybe. But sometimes exposure hurts more than punishment. She sighed. Just be careful. You're playing with something personal. And personal gets messy. I know. But what I didn't tell her was that my plan was already forming. Over the next few weeks, I kept tabs on everything about my father, his health, his financial situation, his old connections. I learned he'd burned bridges with most of his former coworkers. He was living on savings, surviving mostly off my mother's part-time job at a local school. And the most ironic part? The town was starting to see me differently. Word had spread that I was hiring again. Good pay, benefits, stable work. People were calling me the man who brought jobs back. The same people who used to whisper about the arrogant tech guy now treated me like a savior. That's when it clicked. The revenge I wanted wasn't about humiliation. It was about perspective. My father had built his identity on the belief that I was a failure. That only his way, hard labor, blind loyalty, hierarchy, was worthy of respect. So what better revenge than to rebuild his world in my image, and then make him live inside it? I made my decision. 2 weeks later, I called him. Dad, I said when he picked up, his voice guarded. About that job, you can start Monday. There was a long pause. You're serious? Yes. Maintenance division. I'll have HR send you the paperwork. He exhaled slowly. Thank you, son. I mean that. You'll be reporting to Rick Taylor, I added. He'll give you your assignments. He frowned. Rick? I trained that kid. He used to fetch my coffee. Well, I said, trying to hide the edge in my voice. He's your supervisor now. He didn't respond, but I could almost hear the sting on the other end of the line. When Monday came, I watched from my office window as he arrived. Early, of course, wearing his old steel-toed boots and that same faded Westline jacket. He walked across the parking lot with that stubborn pride that had defined him all his life. He didn't know that I could see him. He didn't know that every report, every time card, every complaint he filed went straight to my desk. And over the next few weeks, I saw it happen. The small shifts, the pride cracking under pressure, the quiet frustration of taking orders from men half his age. He didn't quit, though. He kept showing up. But each day, he looked a little smaller, a little more uncertain. Then one afternoon, Nora came into my office. Mr. Hayes, she said carefully, your father's asked to see you. I nodded slowly. Send him in. He entered, hat in hand again, face drawn tight. We need to talk, he said. About what? He hesitated. The work. The people. They don't respect me. They treat me like some rookie. Maybe you need to earn their respect, I said evenly. His eyes narrowed. You think this is funny? No. I think this is fair. He clenched his fists. You brought me here to humiliate me. I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze. No, Dad. I brought you here to see the world you never let yourself understand. The one you told me didn't matter. He stared at me, breathing hard, but there was nothing he could say. The truth was laid bare between us, cold and sharp. I gave you a job, I said quietly. The same chance you never gave me. What you do with it is up to you. For the first time in my life, he had no answer. When he left the room, I knew he wouldn't quit. His pride wouldn't let him. And that was exactly what I needed. Because the next phase of my plan, what would come after this, wasn't about showing him the world had changed. It was about showing him who was changing it. When my father started working under me, I thought watching him struggle would feel satisfying. But it didn't, not at first. For weeks, he came in every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, clocked in, did his work quietly, and left without saying a word to anyone. No outbursts, no lectures, just silence. But beneath that stillness, I could see the slow unraveling. The man who'd once barked orders across factory floors now stood at the bottom of a hierarchy he didn't control. Every instruction he followed from younger supervisors chipped away at the pride he'd spent a lifetime building. It was subtle, but I could see it. The way he avoided looking anyone in the eye. The way his hands fidgeted with his ID badge in the elevator. He'd aged years and months. And yet, he kept coming. Every single day. Until one morning, Rick, the manager I'd put above him, walked into my office looking uneasy. Sir, he said, your father's been causing some issues. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of issues? He's been trying to tell the younger guys how to do their jobs. Keeps saying, that's not how we used to do it at Westline. They're starting to complain. Morale's dropping. I nodded slowly. All right, write him up. Same as you would anyone else. Rick hesitated. He's your father. I know, I said. And that's exactly why you have to treat him like everyone else. A few hours later, the report hit my inbox. Employee continues to disregard operational procedures. Refuses to adapt to automated systems. I approved the disciplinary notice without hesitation. That afternoon, he stormed into my office. "What is this?" he barked, waving the paper in his hand. "Your performance review," I said calmly. "You had them write me up?" "They did their job," I replied. "You've been undermining your supervisors." He slammed his fist on the desk. "You set me up for this. You put me under some kid half my age just so you could watch me fail." I stood, keeping my voice even. "You're here because you asked for a chance. You wanted to work. This is what work looks like now. You can either adapt or move on." His eyes narrowed. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "No," I said, "but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't learning from it." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. That night, I stayed late, reviewing the quarterly reports. We were outperforming every projection. My name was on more contracts than ever before. For the first time in years, the company wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. But part of me still couldn't shake the weight of what I was doing. I wasn't just proving him wrong anymore. I was rewriting the story he'd built his entire life around. Then, about a month later, the opportunity came. Ardent Holdings, the corporation that had originally bought out Westline, was going under completely. Their board was desperate to offload the last of their assets before going bankrupt. "They call me personally. Evan," their representative said, "we're liquidating the remainder of our shares. You're the majority stakeholder. Are you interested in acquiring the rest?" I didn't hesitate. "Send me the paperwork." By the end of that week, I owned 100% of the company that had once fired my father. Everything, the machines, the land, the brand name, the patents, all of it. Mine. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Business news outlets picked up the story. Local entrepreneur completes full buyout of defunct manufacturing giant. Comment sections filled with speculation. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it vengeance. They weren't wrong. When I came into work that Monday, the building felt different. The employees, the energy, everything hummed with the quiet buzz of success. People were proud to be here again. They respected the new systems, the modernization. Except for one man. My father showed up as usual, carrying his lunch in a brown paper bag. But he wasn't on the schedule anymore. HR had already processed the restructuring forms I'd signed the night before. He walked into the break room to find his access badge no longer worked. Confused, he came to my office. "Something's wrong with my card," he said. "It's not wrong," I replied. "You've been let go." He stared at me, not understanding. "What? Your position's been eliminated," I said flatly. "We're streamlining operations." "I'm sorry. You can't be serious." "I am." He blinked, like his brain couldn't process the words. "You're firing your own father?" "I'm restructuring the company," I corrected. "And unfortunately, you don't fit into the new model." He stepped forward, his voice breaking. "After everything I did for this place, after everything I did for you, you're throwing me out?" "No," I said. "I'm just doing what you always taught me to do. Take responsibility for my choices." He was trembling now. "This is your revenge, isn't it?" I met his eyes. "No, this is accountability." For a long time, neither of us said anything. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe he didn't. Maybe that was the point. Finally, he whispered, "You've turned into something I don't even understand." I stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the factory floor, the machines, the workers, the bright, ordered future humming beneath us. "That's because you never tried to." He left without another word. After he was gone, I sat in silence, waiting for the guilt to come. It didn't. A few weeks passed. My mother called me once, furious. "You humiliated your father," she said. "He hasn't been the same since." "I didn't humiliate him," I said. "He built his whole life around control. I just took it back." "You've lost your soul, Evan," she said coldly. "I don't even know who you are anymore." "Then maybe you never did." I hung up and never heard from her again. News spread quickly through the town. Some people called it ruthless. Others called it justified. But those who'd known my father's arrogance, the ones he'd stepped on during his career, understood. They started telling a different story. Not about a son who sought revenge, but about a man who built something lasting out of what others destroyed. As for Brian, he called once. Said Mom and Dad weren't speaking to each other much. Said Dad was different now, quieter, humbler. He tried to sound concerned, But there was something else in his tone too. Envy. I didn't rub it in. I just told him the truth. If you ever want to build something of your own, don't wait for their approval. It'll never come. He didn't answer. Over the next year, Westline transformed completely. The old sign came down. New facilities went up. We shifted to clean energy manufacturing, partnered with major distributors, and doubled our workforce. People stopped associating the name with failure. It became a symbol of innovation, of rebirth. Sometimes I'd walk the floor at night, when everyone had gone home. The sound of machinery echoing through the halls was oddly comforting. It reminded me of the nights I'd stay up coding in my bedroom, dreaming of a life that didn't exist yet. Now it did, and I'd built it myself. I heard through the grapevine that my father had started doing small repairs around town, fixing machines, volunteering at a local shop. People said he'd mellowed, that he'd stopped talking about the good old days. Maybe he finally learned something, but I didn't need to see it. I'd already gotten my closure. Because revenge wasn't the moment I fired him. It wasn't the silence from my mother, or the envy in Brian's voice, or even the wealth I'd built. Revenge was walking through those factory halls, once his kingdom, now mine, and realizing that I no longer needed their approval, their validation, or their belief. I had taken everything they said was impossible and made it inevitable. The day I signed the final paperwork closing the Westline chapter for good, I walked out of the building, stood by my car, and looked up at the empty spot where the old company logo had once hung. For years, I'd chased their acceptance. Now, all that remained was peace. As I turned the key in the ignition, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, sharper, but calm. My father once told me, a man without a real job doesn't build anything. He was wrong. I built everything.